Welcome to Lost Wilderness. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe. New scary stories are posted regularly, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from, whether you're driving, working, or alone at night. Now, let's begin. Working a fire lookout sounds peaceful when you explain it to people who've never done it. They picture mountain air, open views, coffee at sunrise, maybe a little boredom. What they don't picture is how absolute the isolation feels once the road disappears below the ridge and the nearest other human being is hours away if anything goes wrong. That summer, I was stationed in a remote lookout tower deep in the backcountry, the kind of old wood structure that creaked at night even when the wind wasn't moving and made every sound feel personal. My shift had been uneventful all week. A few lightning buildups, some false reports, one distant column of dust that turned out to be a trail crew, nothing serious. By the time that night rolled into morning, I had settled into the usual rhythm. Radio on low, logbook open, boots by the cot, rifle locked in the storage cabinet below, because we were technically not supposed to keep firearms upstairs in the tower. Around 3:40 a.m., I woke to the sound of an engine climbing the service road. That was wrong immediately. Nobody came up at that hour unless something was burning or dying. I went to the window and looked down through the dark. Headlights were moving slow around the switchbacks below, then cutting out one turn before the tower, like whoever was driving didn't want to announce they'd arrived. I stood there in the dark listening as doors opened and shut. 3 men. I knew it by the voices and the footsteps on gravel. None of them called out right away. They just stood down there a minute, maybe looking up at the tower, maybe deciding how to play it. Then one of them shouted, asking if the radio was working. His tone was too casual, too easy. I shouted back that it was and asked what was wrong. He said their truck had blown a tire and their phone wouldn't get service. He wanted to use my radio. That could happen. It was plausible. But everything about the timing and the way they had killed their lights sat wrong in my gut. I told them to stay where they were, and I'd come down. Instead, I killed the inside lamp and stayed by the window. One of them started up the stairs before I said another word. The tower had one narrow exterior staircase with landings at each turn. I could hear his boots on the steps and the loose rail tapping under his hand. "You alone up there?" he asked. That question landed harder than it should have. I didn't answer it. I told him again to stop where he was. He did, but only for a second. Then another voice from below said, "He's just a lookout, man." They all laughed at that, soft but close enough for me to hear clearly. That was the moment the little part of me still trying to make them stranded travelers gave up. I backed away from the window and moved toward the floor hatch that opened to the stairs. The top latch had no real strength to it, just enough to keep the hatch from swinging in bad weather. If they came through that door or hatch together, the tower would become a box with nowhere to go. I picked up the radio and keyed dispatch, but all I got was static and a clip fragment from a weather report bouncing through interference. The mountains sometimes did that before dawn. Dead pockets, bad angle, bad luck. I tried again, nothing useful. Then someone tested the tower door below. Once, twice, harder the third time. Another man started up the steps, then another. I heard one of them say, "Get in, get the keys, get the radio, and be done." So robbery, at least at first. I moved to the window again and looked down just long enough to see the glint of a handgun in one man's hand and a shotgun in another's. Then the one nearest the landing looked up and saw me. He grinned, raised the pistol slightly and said, "You should have opened the door." A second later, the first shot shattered the glass beside my head. The shot blew wood splinters and broken glass across the room and sent me to the floor on instinct. The whole tower rang with it. Before the echo finished rolling off the mountain, the men were moving fast, boots hammering the steps. the shotgun man shouting for the others to get up there before I could call anyone. I crawled to the far side of the room behind the radio desk and tried dispatch again with shaking hands. Still nothing clean enough to matter. I had seconds, maybe less. The old lookout wasn't built for defense. One room upstairs, narrow catwalk around the outside, small storage platform below, and a drop on all sides steep enough to hurt or kill you if you panicked and picked the wrong direction. But it did have one thing the men coming up those stairs didn't know about. A maintenance ladder bolted to the back side below the catwalk, mostly used by crews inspecting the lower supports. Hard to see in the dark unless you already knew it was there. I kicked the desk over toward the floor hatch and dragged the logbook cabinet with it. Not because it would stop them for long, but because it might buy one ugly second. Then I went out the back window onto the catwalk just as the tower door below splintered inward. The mountain air hit cold and sharp. From outside, I could hear them crashing into the lookout room, kicking through debris, cursing when they saw the open window. One of them fired blindly through the frame, and the round cracked past the catwalk rail close enough that I felt the air twitch. I dropped flat, rolled toward the shadowed backside of the tower, and found the maintenance ladder by feel. The wood supports below groaned under movement inside the tower. One of the men came onto the catwalk above me, sweeping a flashlight beam over the darkness below. "He went down," he shouted. "Backside." I climbed as fast as I could with no concern for quiet now. Boots slipping on cold rungs, palms burning. I hit the lower storage platform, dropped the last few feet into brush, and ran downhill through black timber with nothing but moonlight in the shape of the slope to guide me. Behind me, voices split immediately. One stayed at the tower, two came after me, smart enough not to all leave the scene, smart enough to keep pressure on both options. That made me think this was not their first time doing something like this. I angled for the old equipment shed about 50 yards downslope because I knew what was inside. Fuel cans, Pulaski's, chains, spare tools, and a steel pry bar leaned against the wall. I got there just ahead of the first flashlight beam cutting through the trees behind me. The shed door was locked, but the key hung inside the tower, so I smashed the window with my elbow, reached through, unlocked it, and yanked the door open. My arm came back bloody, but I barely felt it. I grabbed the pry bar first and the drip torch second before thinking better of the torch, because fuel was the last thing I needed in a close fight. Boots crashed in the brush outside. One of the men shouted, "Come out and maybe you live." The other laughed and said, "No, he doesn't." That line clarified the whole night. They had come to rob me, yes. The tower had radios, fuel, tools, maybe maps, maybe a truck key if they worked fast enough. But once shots were fired and faces were seen, robbery stopped being the end goal. I was now the evidence they wanted gone. I backed into the darkest corner of the shed with the pry bar raised while the flashlight beam cut across the broken window and then the doorway. The first man came in low with the pistol, clearing the left side first. He never saw me on the right. I swung the pry bar with both hands and caught his wrist hard enough to hear the gun hit concrete before I fully registered, hitting bone. He screamed and turned toward me, and I hit him again across the side of the head. He went down into the shelving, taking half the tools with him. The second man fired through the doorway instantly. The round tore through the shed wall above me and showered sawdust into my face. I dove behind a generator case while he shouted the other man's name. The injured man was still alive, groaning and trying to crawl. The second man didn't rush in after me. He was smarter than that. He stayed outside and started circling the shed, looking for another angle, while somewhere uphill the shotgun roared once from near the tower. Maybe at movement, maybe to scare me, maybe because the third man thought I was trying to double back. Either way, the entire mountain now sounded like death had moved in and settled there for the night. I wiped blood out of my eye, gripped the pry bar tighter, and realized the only reason I was still alive was that they thought fear would keep me hiding. They had no idea I was about to come out of that shed swinging. I waited until the man outside crossed the back wall of the shed, his flashlight beam sliding past the broken window toward where he thought I might be crouched. Then I kicked the side door open and hit him at full speed before he could turn. The pry bar caught him across the ribs first, then again across the forearm as he brought the pistol up too late. The gun went off into the dirt between us, deafening at that distance. We went down together in the brush, rolling hard enough that I lost the bar for a second and thought I was dead. But panic makes some things simple. He was between me and the gun, so I drove both thumbs into his eyes and felt his entire body seize. He screamed, rolled off, and I came up on one knee with the pry bar back in my hand just as he tried to stand. I hit him in the jaw, and he dropped flat. No time to see if he stayed there. The shotgun man had heard everything and was coming downhill fast, crashing through the dark with no more caution left. He saw me by the shed and fired once from too far out, the blast shredding brush to my left. I ran for the truck instead, not the tower truck, theirs. It was still parked below the stairs where they had left it, angled badly on the gravel turnout with one rear door open. If I could get to it first, maybe there were keys, maybe there was a radio, maybe at minimum there was cover. The third man saw where I was headed and shouted to the one still inside the tower. A second later, another beam of light snapped on above me. I cut across the turnout, dove behind their truck, and yanked the driver's door. Locked. I checked the visor, then the seat, then the ground beneath it. Nothing. Then the first man I had hit in the shed staggered into the turnout below me, one hand on his ruined wrist, blood down the side of his face, trying to bring the pistol up with his offhand. I didn't think. I picked up a fist-sized rock from the gravel and threw it with everything I had. It hit him square in the nose and bought just enough time for me to rush him. We slammed into the side of the truck. The pistol fired once into the door panel. I trapped his gun hand against the metal and drove my forehead into his face so hard I saw white sparks myself. He folded. I tore the pistol free and turned just as the shotgun man reached the bottom of the stairs. He stopped cold when he saw the gun in my hand, but only for a heartbeat. Then he raised the shotgun anyway. I fired first. I don't know if I hit him clean or if the round only clipped him, but it changed his plan. He twisted sideways, the shotgun blast going wild past the hood, and stumbled hard against the rail. That was enough to make the third man at the tower finally choose his own survival over mine. He shouted something I couldn't catch, and then both of them started moving, one limping into the trees below the turnout, the other breaking from the stair rail and following him into the dark. I stood there with the stolen pistol shaking in both hands, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. Not right away. The mountain went quiet except for the tick of hot metal from their truck and the wind moving across the ridge. I grabbed the keys when I finally found them in the first man's jacket pocket, got their truck started, and used the radio mounted under the dash to call anything and anyone I could reach. This time somebody answered. County law enforcement first, then forest dispatch, then a chain of overlapping voices telling me to stay where I was, lock the vehicle, and keep the headlights on. By the time deputies and rangers reached the lookout road, dawn had started to bleed into the trees. They found one man unconscious beside the shed, one blood trail leading into timber from the turnout, and signs that at least one more had fled on foot before law enforcement ever got close. They found broken glass in the tower, spent shells on the stairs, stolen gear piled near the lower platform, and enough physical evidence to reconstruct the night almost perfectly. What they didn't get, at least not that day, were all three men. Two made it far enough into the forest to buy themselves time. One deputy told me later they likely knew that country better than most locals and had probably scoped the tower before ever coming up the road. That part I believed. Men like that do not improvise murder on a mountain at 4 in the morning unless they have already decided no one nearby is likely to stop them. I spent the rest of the day giving statements with hands that still wouldn't stop shaking. By the time they finally drove me down off the ridge, the lookout tower looked small in the rearview mirror, almost fragile, like a toy left on top of the mountain. It didn't feel that way the night before. That night it had felt like the whole world. People ask sometimes whether I ever went back to lookout work after that. I did, just not to that tower. Some places absorb what happened in them and never really give it back. I still think about the moment those men changed their minds, when the robbery stopped being enough and killing me became the cleaner option. I think about how close that line was, and I think about the only reason I'm the one telling the story now. Somewhere between the broken window, the maintenance ladder, the shed, and the gravel turnout, I stopped trying to outlast them and started trying to hurt them back hard enough to make survival more expensive than leaving. That was the only thing they weren't prepared for. Thank you for spending your time with Lost Wilderness. If you enjoy slow, immersive horror stories, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Wherever you're listening from, have a safe night.